Welcome to Living Water this morning. As you might notice, I'm not a face that you see here a lot, but I was here once last year, and it's very exciting for me to be here with you in this building. My name is Hilbelink, and I come from Michigan. I live there with my wife Katie, who is founder of Epiphany, I think. And we live there, and we pastor at a church called First Church of God in Greenville, Michigan. I know this church because we were together back at Calvary back in the day, and I know many of the faces here, many of the people here, and it's a joy for me to be here with you this morning. I'm actually fairly excited about being in this place. I was telling somebody that I was going to be preaching here this morning, and I said, well, maybe you want to come and hear me, since we were college friends. And they said, I think I got stuff going on. And then I said, no, well, they're in their new building. And she said, oh, maybe I will come. So it's not my preaching that gets you here. Maybe you like the architecture. This morning we're going to be looking at a story that happens after Christmas. And as I said earlier in our prayer, I think this year, in comparison to a lot of years, is a year where we have mixed feelings at Christmas. I come from a town where we have only 10,000 people, so not really that much bigger than our city. But we have a homeless shelter. We have 19 food pantries. We have an unbelievable amount of unemployment, people living in the streets, people who can't make their next mortgage payment, people who are really struggling. And I know that it's probably not that much different here. And sometimes when the economy breaks down, sometimes things don't necessarily filter up. But for those of you who had a lot of stocks or had a 401k, you've probably seen it do the same thing that I saw my 401k do, and it went something like this. This is a year where we look back and say, what have we really accomplished? Because we stand here a year later, and our bank accounts are smaller. Some of us have less family members. Some of us have had a rough year. Our country has had a rough year. Our world has had a rough year. You hear talk about terrorism. You hear talk about the economy failing. When's the bottom going to hit in the recession? Are we headed for a depression? It's one of those years when you might want something other than Christmas. Maybe Christmas just doesn't do it for you anymore. Maybe the joy is just too awkward. Some people like to create their own holidays. And I ask you to watch the clip that we've got here to see somebody who did create their own holiday.
I got your message. I haven't celebrated Festivus in years. What is your Christmas? Tell me what it is. Many Christmases ago, I went to buy a doll for my son. I reached for the last one I had, but so did another man. As I rained blows upon him, I realized there had to be another way. What happened to the doll? It was destroyed. But out of that, a new holiday was born. A Festivus for the rest of us. And is there a tree? No, instead there's a pole. Requires no decoration. I find tinsel distracting. Happy Festivus. What is it? Is that the pole? George, Festivus is your heritage. It's part of who you are. That's why I hate it. Have you seen the pole, Puga? Yeah, he doesn't need to see the pole. He's going to see it. It's made from aluminum. Very high strength to weight ratio. I find your belief system fascinating. And at the Festivus dinner, you gather your family around and tell them all the ways they have disappointed you over the past year. The tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances. I got a lot of problems with you people. Now, you're going to hear about it. And now, as Festivus rolls on, we come to the feats of strength.
The feats of strength.
This year, the honor goes to Mr. Craig.
Frank, no offense, but this holiday's a little out.
You can't know who's going to do the feats of strength. Until you pin me, George, Festivus is not over.
Please, someone stop this.
Let's rumble!
Come on, be sensible.
Stop crying and fight your father. This is the best Festivus ever! Festivus is back! I'll get the pole out of the crawl space.
Some people create their own holidays to deal with the fact that they don't like Christmas, or Christmas rubs them the wrong way. Frank Costanza has an interesting perspective on life. My favorite part in there is the airing of grievances that he does, telling everybody the way that they have disappointed him over the past year. I think many of us could sit down at Christmas this year and go around the table and figure out ways that people have disappointed us. I'd like to read for you this morning a story from Matthew 2. Matthew 2, verses 1 through 12. It's a story that might be familiar to many of you, but I ask you to follow along anyways. It's the visit of the Magi, the three kings, the wise men, to Jesus. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who was to be born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and we've come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he called together all the people's chief priests, the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time that the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen in the east went ahead of them until they stopped over a place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. And on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and incense and of myrrh. And having been warned by a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. In my house, right next to one of our windows, we've got a nativity set. It's one of these nice willow tree nativity sets that you get from the bookstore. It's one of those that you would never buy for yourself because it's way too expensive, but because people give it to you, you have it, and we have one of those. But the one piece that we haven't been given yet is the wise men. And so we've got the entire nativity set up, and even the wise men's camel, but no wise men. And so our nativity set is not quite complete. Well, if you know anything about biblical history, that's actually fairly accurate. The wise men were not actually at the manger scene. We read in here that they came to a house. Well, we know when Jesus was born, he was in a manger in probably a cave or a stable or something of the sort. And so when the wise men came to him, he was probably like 1 or 2 years old. So the wise men story is really the first story that happens after Christmas. It's the first thing that happens after Christmas has been completed. Who were these wise men that came to the story, came into the story of Jesus? You know, it's kind of interesting when we read through the Bible, we see all the connections drawn. They're always drawing connections back to the Old Testament, or drawing different connections from person to person, but we never really see any connection for the wise men. They just kind of show up, and they talk to Herod, and they show up to Jesus, they give him some gifts, and then they leave again. We never really figure out who they are. The word magi is more accurate than wise men. They were probably some sort of sorcerers or magicians or some sort of ruler in their kingdom. People think that they came from Persia or even farther to the east, which would be like around India. Some people even think that maybe they came from China. So there was these three men that come on these camels to visit. What's most important about the wise men is that remember, first of all, they're wise, and second of all, that they have wealth, and third of all, that they have importance. The wise men were important people to come to be visiting just a random child in a stable or in a house anywhere in the countryside. These weren't just people that showed up at your house and offered you gold and frankincense and myrrh. These weren't traveling salesmen. These were actually people who came there with a purpose. And so when we read about them, we have to understand that the trip that they made was something that was very special. The one thing that we really do know about Magi is that Magi always pay attention to the stars. They're astrologers. A lot of things have been done with stars. You can get your horoscope in the daily newspaper, or you can find different constellations in the stars. But there were people in this day that studied the stars.